Right, welcome everyone. Jane, my wife and fellow coach. I'm Murtha, the author of Create Your Own Life Story, and we're here today to talk about number 8 of a 10-part series. And today we're going to be talking about overwhelm and overthinking. Such a big subject. We've all suffered with it. It's probably one of the biggest subjects this last several years that we're all having problems with, and we've noticed it in ourselves and clients. And before we sort of kick into it, really, I'm going to share a 7-stage process because I think this is really appropriate for sort of trying to understand, because we've all got our own models as different therapists and coaches, haven't we? And this is a model that sort of I developed and we keep using and we keep playing with. So in my model, I call it, and for anyone that's read the book, it's I call it the 7 stages of change. And good and bad change, by the way. So you start off with number 1. Imagine starting in a circle that's going clockwise, and it's number 1 is thinking process. So, our thinking is basically the ignition. It kicks off the whole process. And then thinking, if we keep thinking about something, it leads to number 2, going around the wheel clockwise, is a feeling. So it initiates a feeling in us. And then that really, because the feeling is emotional based and it's got chemicals and hormones, and it's starting to that's the magic of life, isn't it? We turn it's an energy, but that's the magic of life, because we turn a thought into a feeling. So it actually becomes a liquid inside of us. And I just find that amazing. But working around the circle, then the feeling becomes turns into an action, because that drives an action.
It motivates us
or not. It might be a non-action. So, it creates a reaction, a response, a decision. And then we move on to an action, which gives us a certain behavior, and we start, behaving in a different way. That behavior formulates into an embedded habit. And then that habit over time, if we carry it on, gives us basically our life that we create, which is our results and our consequences. And where the loop literally joins back up again is whatever results and consequences and, that we've got, that then feeds back into our thinking, and the whole process starts again.
It becomes our beliefs.
I don't know if I explained that very well, but it's we're going to probably put up an image of it as well with this podcast and the videos, so you can have a look at that if you haven't already seen it in the book. But I think really that, for me, the reason I wanted to start with that is that this process of number 1, thinking, the ignition, the spark, number 2, the feeling, which is the fuel, that lights it up and makes it come alive. Thinking and feeling doesn't just start the chain reaction, it keeps feeding back on itself. So if we keep thinking of something, we feel it, and then if we feel it, we energize the thoughts, and it can almost become
it becomes our truth.
It becomes our truth.
It becomes true for us.
Yeah, but it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it?
Yes.
That what we think and feel, we basically create. And that 7 stage,
we are creators.
We are creators and co-creators with the universe. And I think what that process is there that I use all the time with my clients is to try and show them that we are in control of our own destiny, and whether we are allowing our mind, which is thoughts and feelings, to take us over. Because, in the simple terms of overthinking and overwhelm, I believe that, thinking in the head, feeling in the body. So we start with overthinking, and that's what I've noticed in myself and clients' behavior over the years. We start with overthinking, and if we keep thinking about something, think, it eventually blows up into a feeling in the body, and that's what I describe as overwhelm. Would that be your sort of interpretation?
Yes, but I think if we're running too fast, it becomes overwhelm.
Yeah.
So it's the repetitive nature of it. It becomes a belief, first of all, and whether that works for you or it doesn't is, a matter in time you might work out. But of course, we get a lot of our thoughts from our very early years and our conditioning and programming. So some of it we are aware of, it's our thoughts, and some of it is so ingrained from a very early childhood pattern.
Yeah.
And so those are harder to break, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And I always love, I keep coming back, one of my favourite books for 20 years ago, and it's not a particularly easy read always, is Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, probably one of the biggest selling books in the world for personal development. Talks about the ego, talks about the mind, talks about how we basically overthink too often and how that will create pain in the body, you know. He uses different language, we use different language, but, you know, what I want to make the point is that thinking is not bad.
No.
Creative thinking is good if it's moving us forward and upward in a progressive, solution-focused way. Where thinking becomes a problem for us is where it goes the other way, where it becomes habitual, it becomes negative, it becomes repetitive. And what we're doing, you know, it's almost like we're caught in a habit loop, a circle. And we can't find a door out. And actually, rather than thinking about moving our life onwards, you know, and getting over those obstacles, we're, you know, we keep going back to the same problems again and again. And actually, we're rather than taking ourselves up and elevating ourselves, we're sort of driving ourselves into the ground. That's the way I always use.
And it's also almost like an acceptance. I'm a warrior, always have been, always will be. Good point. That is a really strong sentence, and that might have been picked up from your mother. You know, you might have heard your mother saying that, or your father. You know, it's a belief. It's a core belief that you feel you can't shift. But actually, if it's not working for you in your life, because, you know, worry is a waste of energy. It's about the what ifs, something might happen or not. It's a bit pointless, really. But some people, many patients that used to come in to see me in the NHS, they used to feel, you know, sort of fatalistic, that was their lot and there was nothing they could do about it. And it's really sad.
It is sad because, you know, if we look at the main, let's put it into a tagline, you know, procrastination. Which is, you know, we're worrying and thinking so much that we've driven ourselves into a position where we can't move.
I'm no good, I'm stupid.
You know, we procrastinate is basically we're not taking action. And when we're stuck, that's where we become stale. And I think...
And our life shrinks.
Yeah, and, you know, we can overthink about things that have happened to us in the past, you know, that person that said something 10 years ago, you know, we're still holding on to it. You know, we haven't let it go. And another one is worst case scenario, looking forward. You know, assumptions, presumptions, fears. There's stuff that actually with fears that have not even happened yet. You know, we are caught in this sort of habit loop of worry. And that was a great point that, you know, I'm the worrier of the family. I always overthink. You know, we find these things out in them early first sessions with clients. You know, we're trying to find out how they define themselves and what their identity is. And it's quite freeing when we show them that they don't have to just show up with that old habit of the last 30 years, that they can change the story. They can create a new story.
A thought is just a thought and it can be changed.
Yeah.
It takes effort.
Yeah. So you've got some great stories, haven't you?
Just, you know, a client the other day was concerned. They had a meeting with their boss. They've been working at this company for 2 or 3 years, and they've worked their way up, and, you know, they were eager and willing when it's a big company, a national company, and their office, you know, they would put on charity events and they needed someone to, you know, organise, you know, raising money. And this person said, yeah, I'll do it. And, you know, it snowballed. You know, this person was so good at it and got a lot of praise and did really well, and it was noted. And they said, well, why don't you, you know, make it part of your job and you can actually have a team, you know, under you to organise. And so, you know, this person had that, and they also had their everyday work in the office as well, and, you know, it became quite a burden, really. And they started getting stress and, you know, it sort of externalized by rashes and anxiety and not being able to sleep. And anyway, she knew that there was going to be a meeting, and she was sharing it with me, and she was worried about it because she'd made all these assumptions that maybe they were going to give her job to somebody else. Maybe she wasn't good enough at her job. Maybe all these assumptions about not being good enough. Maybe the boss didn't like her. There was talk about her working for a new partner, and she was really quite worried about it. But we discussed it, and we sort of looked at it that maybe it could be something else. Anyway, she had the meeting, and that she rang me the next day, and she actually said, I'm so relieved that actually they want to redistribute my job because they can see I'm so busy, and they don't want me to leave or get overwhelmed. The reality is that they would like to share my job out, and I can tell them which jobs I want to pass over. So, she stood in her own power, which was great.
I think it's great. And I think that, we always talk about, fear, false evidence appearing real. For anyone that hasn't watched the one of the series on fear that we've recorded, I would suggest to go and please have a look at it, because so many of our fears are not actually real. And that's a typical example that she's, overthinking, which would have led to her overwhelm. So feelings in the body, because, what we forget, I think sometimes is that, overthinking takes energy, and energy is fuel. So in biohacking terms, we're talking about fuel being hormones, hormones, chemicals. So, lots of cortisol and lots of adrenaline, just as like the better feeling hormones, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, all of those chemicals, we have to be very careful that, if we use too much of them, we're going to be exhausted. So overthinking, cognitive thoughts in the head, overwhelm, feelings in the body. Yeah. If we're thinking too much and feeling too much, we are going to feel exhausted, aren't we?
Yes. And it's like going from 0 to 100 miles an hour. And that's what I use commonly with all my clients. Sort of, they've started out this one thought, and suddenly it's snowballed, and it's huge. And actually, the reality, when you actually examine the evidence, it's not true. Because you don't know, because it hasn't happened yet, and it probably won't happen.
I mean, it's a testimony to how great we are as creative thinkers, isn't it? That we can build these whole worlds, these whole castles in the sky of stuff that's not even happened yet. Now, obviously, the upside of that is when we are envisioning and manifesting, we're looking at hopes and dreams and objectives and goals for the future. Well, that's good creative thinking. But where it gets bad is if we use that same creative force, the mind, to project it into the future to create worst case scenarios.
Yes, and we get confused, we have racing thoughts, and our thoughts run away with us. And, that energy is driving us, mad, really.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, literally. And I think especially in the last few years, and, looking at other consequences that I've noticed, last few days we've been making a note about, different clients and what the consequences of overthinking and overwhelm are. And for me, one of the big ones is mind fog. It's literally you can't see straight, even though the wisdom, the insight, the knowledge, the experience to help you out of this current situation. It's almost like a steel door closes and you haven't got access to the memory bank that you need to help you get out of this current dilemma or challenge. Yeah. And so that's a big one. Making the wrong choices, the fear around failure that comes in when we start to overthink it in a negative way. What happens if I lose? What happens if I fail? What will other people think of me? FOPO, fear of other people's opinions.
It's cup half empty attitude, isn't it?
It is, and the overthinking.
I'm lacking in something.
And the overthinking.
You're not being your own best friend there, are you?
And the overthinking is taking you sort of downward and backward rather than forward and upward. And confusion, another one, inability to focus. I've noticed, in many people, noticed it in myself. When I am overthinking and overwhelmed, it's almost like I can't focus. It's like I've got that monkey mind. I'm constantly looking over there, watching this, looking for the threat there. I'm almost too hyper vigilant, hyper
That's it.
sensitized.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's the brain, is when you
Yeah.
overthink and overwhelm, you've built up yourself into such a frenzied state that
Yes.
everything is a threat, everything is on alert, everything is like red lights flashing, and then you can't settle and focus.
Yeah, and you feel out of control, and that feels fearful, and then it's harder to communicate what you're feeling because you've got all these busy thoughts racing around your head that it's really hard to articulate and tell somebody, hey, I need help. I can't, you get frightened of reaching out to people.
Yeah, analysis paralysis as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's another thing, that people are so frozen in their fear, frozen in their anxiety, frozen in their overthinking that they just can't, and I think the problem is that we get trapped and we can't logically think our way out of situations. So we're not very good problem solvers, are we?
Yeah, when it gets to overwhelm, yes, you can't think your way out of overwhelm.
Yeah, Einstein said it, didn't he? You can't think your way out of the same level of thinking that got you into it.
Yes.
And I think the problem is that, we've got to appreciate you don't feel your overwhelm in the head. You feel it in the body, in the organs, in the different parts, the shoulders, the neck, the thighs. You are feeling that overwhelm in every part, and it almost like you can't move, can you? In the worst case scenario, you will start to have severe pains. And this is
chest pains, and it can actually mirror heart attacks. The amount of people I did ECGs on when I worked at the NHS, and it turned out to be stress, but it imitated heart attacks. They get chest pain because they tighten up. The shoulders were up by their ears, and they hadn't looked after themselves. They'd overcompensated by eating the wrong foods, drinking too much, smoking too much, and actually made themselves physically sick because they were overcompensating, because they were doing too much. They were doing rather than taking breaks of that balance of work, rest and play.
Just sort of stepping back and, if we not only can't logically think our way out of a problem because we're too mind frozen, what's actually happening, we're not going to go into the science of it, but what we're looking at is the prefrontal cortex part of the brain literally shuts down, doesn't it? And the amygdala,
which is the primitive brain.
Primitive primal brain.
Fight or flight.
That literally regulates our emotions, it takes us over. It almost like possesses us. And so what we've got to do, and I always remember going to one of down in Plymouth with one of the Tony Robbins events, and like he said, it's not that we shouldn't feel our feelings of dis-ease, or we shouldn't feel the sort of anger and the annoyance, the resentment, the disappointment. That's a big one for a lot of people, isn't it? Disappointment. We shouldn't not tap into those and feel them, because that is pushing the beach ball below the water. But what we should do, and this is what he sort of taught the audience, is that set yourself a timer. Set yourself a timer. So if someone has aggravated you, if someone's disappointed you, if you're really something's happened and you're not happy, still feel it, but sit with it and set a time on it and say, right, I'm going to have an angry hour to really get it out of my system. I'm going to rant, I'm going to blame, I'm going to complain. It's called being human. We're not robots. Get it out of your system, but then set a timer and make sure that you don't roll that small thing that started there and it become a bad thing, a bad week, a bad year, a bad decade.
A character trait.
Because what we know, and we talk to people about this all the time with our clients, is that if you don't let go, if you don't drop something and you keep overthinking it and overwhelm floods your body. And we all know, we've all spoke to people and they're still moaning about something that happened to them or something someone done to them 10, 20, 30 years ago.
They've become their story.
They've become the script. And actually it's holding
their
them.
identity. Yeah.
It's their identity and it's holding them in headlock. And they've always, in a kind of weird way, they've always got that victim excuse. Oh, I couldn't make something of my life, you know,
Mm.
because that happened to me, or that person
Yeah.
stitched me up, or that person sort of, you know, took my money, and or that person ran away and, you know, from a relationship that I was fully engaged with. So we've got to be careful that we set ourselves a limit, and, you know, and realize that if we overthink problems from the past, they become overwhelmed feelings in the body, and we literally hardwire our emotional nervous system, don't we?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think what happens is that every opportunity, we've got to try and train our minds to let go and drop these hates, these resentments, these fears, these anxieties. But there's sort of stuff that's gone on before that we're not very happy about. I mean, you've got a great personal story, haven't you? Which sort of is...
Well, just finishing there was that, you know, every time we think about something, it's like regurgitating it. We're reliving it. We're bringing it up again and again. So as Bill said, all that chemistry of those chemicals are coming up. So it's not just your mind, it's your body as well.
Yeah.
And my story is, you know, Bill and I at different times have both had burnout, but mine was at the NHS, and it developed in as these things do, as in a small way. We had staff sickness, and all of our nursing team worked on different days. We worked part-time, but I was one of the I was there 4 days a week. Some people were there 2.5 days, 3 days. Anyway, you know, people were off and being sick, and or operations or holidays. And, you know, at first, we just would manage the list. You couldn't contact all those patients and tell them that that nurse wasn't in that day. So, you know, we'd just happily, as a team building, we'd cover the list. But, you know, when it went on for several months, it became very exhausting. And because I was there a lot of the time, you know, somebody who hadn't managed to finish their work would leave me a note. So I might have to contact that patient, or I might have to take that specimen or bloods out of the fridge for them and make sure it got to the hospital on time. Or so, you know, my job was very varied. So I didn't just have my list to do and sharing someone else's list. There were other things coming in all the time. So that's a bit like the bullet train. And so in a way to compensate that, I would go into work earlier and do some preparation, and I would come home later. Now, I was already working it's sort of 8:30 till 6. So, you know, that was making my day longer. So I wasn't getting the breaks. Lunchtime was half an hour. Well, because I had things to attend to once the last patient had left, I couldn't get that done. So my lunch half an hour would go. Meetings that we would have where we could, as a team, talk about and express our problems or things, they didn't happen. So I had nowhere to take it. So I would wake up at night with my heart racing. I'd be thinking, did I do that? Did I not? I'd get back into work, and, you know, I became quite OCD. I would start double checking things. I started getting paranoid. If someone would, you know, hadn't left a note with something, I would find myself, you know, feeling, you know, it was my responsibility. I took on too much responsibility, and I felt I was drowning, and I was living on adrenaline. And so I would, you know, when I came home, I had nothing to give my relationship. I didn't want to talk for at least an hour and a half because I was exhausted.
Sometimes it has its benefits.
I would have a glass of wine or two to try and help me get to sleep. But of course, it's not a great way, because then you wake up because you've got all that sugar inside you. So, you know, the first thing to go were all my good habits of looking after myself. You know, I was hyper vigilant. I was waiting for things to go wrong. I was just basically trying to run out in front of the storm, because I was so frightened something was going to go wrong. And I actually felt quite angry, because I could see faults in the system, and I did speak up and I asked for more help, and they said, oh yes, well, so-and-so's meant to be coming back. And, you know, but I didn't want to lose that invincibility.
Stoicism.
That stoicism. But after several months, it got to me, and I had to take time off, and I felt defeated. I felt very angry. I felt defeated. And I also felt grief because I felt like the job that I loved and lived and breathed wasn't the same anymore.
Had a passion for, like a lot of people in the NHS.
And, I didn't feel my values and things were being represented. So I went back to work and I tried to get back into it. But actually, I realised then that I was done with it, and I left.
16 years had your scalp, and and what is sad as well, we have a lot, as you know, Jane. Thank you for that story, by the way. And we know we went through it, didn't we? It was a big thing for you at the time, and
but also, one of the big things. Sorry, Bill, to interject, but one of the big things was I didn't have compassion for myself.
Yeah. Self-compassion.
I didn't have compassion for myself,
which is what we've covered. If you want to check out another video, but and the same with energy management as well, which is linked to you having to manage your energies, wasn't it? That was a big thing. So you guys can check that out in another video. But I think what is sad, and what we've noticed is that we've got a lot of friends and family that are in the nursing teams or in doctors in some of our family and friends, that we're thinking of. And I don't know why. I coach, as Jane does. We coach in many different sectors, in many different walks of life. But the worst leadership and people management that we see show up, even worse than the Law Society, even worse than solicitors, worse than, in politics, the worst leadership and people management practices we see, the NHS. Something is going seriously wrong there, and we see it because we don't just see it, we are coaching people that, like Jane was, are at the end of their tether and are almost broken, and, they are overwhelmed. Let's come back to bring it back to the
expectations. If you've got 10 minutes with a patient or 20 minutes, that sometimes is not enough time, because humans are not like, I don't know, they're not like robots. They'll share something with you and you can't just drop it. If they've been brave enough to say something about their health that concerns them, you can't just say, 10 minutes up. Of course you say book to see your doctor, but you have to show some compassion. And I think the old way, when I first started the NHS, there was time for that. But now it's become profit before people.
Yeah. And that's the way
it's all gone wrong. But I won't go down that road.
Yeah, that's a long road as well, by the way. But yeah, the secret is, the fact is that we see it a lot with the people that bring their stories and dramas and problems and dilemmas to our table. And, it inevitably, somewhere the NHS has got it wrong, because there are major leadership and people management, especially issues. Lots of companies are doing brilliantly and they're moving in the right direction to understand people and what really needs to give them passion and purpose for their job. That industry has got a lot to fix. And, one of the things just that we're just going to finish with now is that, perhaps Jane might have one idea as well. What works for me to stop my overthinking and overwhelm is, do you remember when we were all children and we all, for that first time ever, we went to the fairground and we went on the helter-skelter, and then, you waited up the line, that weaved around the top, and then, there's someone sort of at the top that would give you a coconut mat, and it was the first time you realised how high it was, and you really didn't want to go down the helter-skelter now, and yet all the kids behind you were shouting, get him out of the way, and all of that. So your pride said that you've got to go. And I remember the white knuckle of holding on and let yourself go another few feet, and then a few more feet, and then eventually you would go to the bottom, and for 10, 15 seconds you'd be, screaming your head off as you sort of hit the bottom. Now, the way I look at a thought is the same. If you want to stop a thought from starting a chain reaction, especially if it's a thought that's going to lead to something bad or lead you into a darker place, the best time when the energy is low is to catch that thought right at the beginning. I know it's not easy, and you will have to train yourself. And this is what I train a lot of my clients. I've trained myself, that we have to catch that negative thought that we know is going to light up a whole chain reaction of bad feelings in the body, overwhelm. And actually, a lot of the energy can be saved if you catch that one bad thought right at the beginning, right at the top of the helter-skelter. Do you want to speak to that, love, about the way
well,
you
it's
deal
similar,
with it?
really.
Yeah.
It's it's you can actually give that inner critic because that's what it is that inner critic, a name, like Debbie Downer or something like that.
Poor old Debbie. It's always Debbie, isn't it?
Well, okay then.
It's like Billy No Mates, isn't it? I had to live with that one for years.
So, and so I sort of say, welcome, Debbie, say your piece. And, I know you're only trying to protect me, but actually I'm okay.
That's a good way of...
It's sort of turning the volume down on that inner critic.
Yeah.
So, you can't banish it. The inner critic there, the ego's there for a reason, to protect you. But you can actually turn around and in a kind voice, sort of your inner coach takes over and says, I actually, I hear what you say, but I'm going to stop this now. Before we go down that rabbit hole.
I mean, it's basically what we always tell our clients all the time, which is, you've got a choice. Be kind, be gentle, be loving to yourself, self-compassion.
Give yourself time for renewal.
Yeah, but the first thing that is to think: do you want to take the wheel of your life, which means you're controlling your inner
to be the driver,
voice, or do you want to go on the back seat and be hurtled around the city
and the passenger?
Yeah. So thank you very much again, Jane. That's
thank you, Bill.
All on overthinking and overwhelm. Hope you can look at some of the other videos in the series that we've put together kindly to share some of our insights and knowledge and tools, and we'll be back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.